Hi, kids. Good morning. My name is Kelly. I'm the pastor here at Edges. I'm so glad that we're all here today. Especially, I just wanted to say how cool it is to have our kids come up there thinking together about how God inhabits the praise of people, how God really comes when we're together. And I'll admit that's why I need to be here today. I tried listening to Alexa in my kitchen, and it's just not the same as being here with all of us together. I think it's true God lives inside of our worship, and so today I was just thinking about how grateful I am that we have musicians who will worship with us together each week. So thank you all for offering that true gift. We're in the middle of a series. We're in sort of the home stretch of a series. For the past 2 weeks, we've been practicing with the Bible. We've been learning to really read it together. We've been asking ourselves and God for courage to try living in its truth, to actually try some practical things out that we think about when we're here together each week, to look for whether or not that's shifting our perspective at all. This weekend is maybe as good a time as any to think about what are the kinds of things that do and that should shift our perspectives. So we've done this together by tackling the book of Philippians, which is a book in the New Testament of the Bible. And to get you up to speed, if you haven't read it or if you haven't been here the past couple of weeks, this book is a letter, and it boils down really to a heartfelt invitation from a guy who wants to sweep his friends up into what he's found matters most in life. So he writes to invite them to it and to tell them about it. Two of the things we've talked about over the past 2 weeks were gratefulness and humility. Those are attitudes that we've discovered can matter a lot, and Paul, the author of the letter, seems to suggest that they can always be present, no matter what else is going on. So we've been thinking about how those attitudes might help us to hold on to what is good. But today is where I think Paul takes a shift. Today is where I think the letter calls us to think about what I call the inner life questions. These are questions that I believe every human asks, with or without the benefit of God talk. So it's not just Christians or people in churches or people in other faith traditions who ask these questions. I think every human asks these questions. As you hear them, see if you think it's so. Questions like, does my life have meaning and purpose? Whom and what shall I serve? Whom and what can I trust? How can I find and maintain hope in the world? What does any of this matter in the face of the fact that I'm going to die one day? Inner life questions. So I think these inner life questions are often dueling with what I call the outer life preoccupations. Questions like, what am I going to do this weekend? Or what am I going to do now that I've had this weekend? What are they thinking about me? Am I performing well at my job? What do my kids need from me next? When do I have time to grocery shop? How will I ever get it all done? Now, besides the addiction that many of us have to outer life preoccupations, one other reason that it's really easy to avoid the inner life questions is because they aren't questions that yield to quick, easy, conventional answers. Right? I know what my kids are going to need from me next. The answer is a ride. Outer life question. The inner life questions are much harder. They remind me of something that poet Rainer Maria Rilke says about questions. She says this: some questions must be lived so that we might gradually, without knowing it, live along some distant day into the answers. The kinds of questions that have to be lived. So my first question this morning for you to just think about yourself is, have you ever known someone who seems to have lived their way toward inner life answers? They'd be characterized maybe by this sentiment, that they seem like they're just covered up in what matters most. Their life seems to be about what matters most. See if you can pull that person up. So, a few years ago, I read another poet. Her name is Mary Oliver. Are some of you familiar with her? This is making me sound very literary, right? 2 poets in one sermon, which I am not. But I want to tell you about Mary Oliver. So Mary Oliver has a famous poem, and that poem ends with this question. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? What a question, right? So Oliver in this poem begins with another big question. And then in the poem, you watch her live her way toward this question. And she winds up with an answer that she posits in the form of another question, which is the one I just said to you. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Now, I bet I think about that question every day. Because one thing that we all have been given, everyone in this room has been given, is the gift of this life. So what's it for? What will we do with it? On that note, I think both Mary Oliver and Paul, who's the author of the letter we're looking at today, wow. I think they both have some ideas worth considering. So first, what I'd like to do is share Mary Oliver's entire poem with you this morning. You'll find it on your tables on those little cards there. I think they're blue and yellow and green. If everybody will just take one of those. I want to give you just about 2 minutes to reflect on it silently, and then we'll read it together out loud. But while you're reflecting, I'd like to invite you to ask yourself this question. For Mary Oliver, the author of this poem, what is life for? What does life seem to be for as you read this poem? Okay, take a couple minutes. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? And who made the grasshopper? No, this grasshopper, I mean. The one who has flung herself out of the grass. The one who is eating sugar out of my hand. Who is moving her jaws back and forth now instead of up and down. Who is gazing around with her enormous, complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is, but I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed. How to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? I'd like to let you talk about that question in groups for a little bit this morning. We do this sometimes here at Edges, get in groups and talk about questions that matter. This is a big question. For Mary Oliver, what is life for? From the words of that poem. See if you can find at least 4, maybe up to 6 folks. Bat that question around for a little bit. I'm going to give you 4 minutes, and if you finish talking about the question, you can just use the time to get to know each other a little bit better. So try to find somebody who you don't know, hook up with them, see what happens. Go, 4 minutes. Got about 1:45 left. One minute. 1 minute left. All right, 10 seconds. Okay, here we are. That was a little grasshopper sound. I don't know if you noticed. It was thematic chime there to end the moment. All right, so the poem is the kind of poem I think we could talk about all day, but the specific question I asked you is, For Mary Oliver, what is life for? What did you glean from her poem? Now, this is sort of a philosophical question, so your philosophical answer might be tempting to be like a paragraph in length. So let's try to kind of, what did you hear that you can soundbite in about 10 words or less? What's life for?
It's for being present.
It's for being present. Ooh, I heard a lot of people agree with that. What else?
You said reflecting and questioning.
It's for reflecting and questioning.
About changes.
Oh, it's about changes. You mean like changes in people or?
Changes in life over time.
Oh, changes in life over time. Yeah, sure. Thanks, Noel. What else did you hear?
For experiencing the beautiful in the ordinary.
It's for experiencing the beautiful and the ordinary. One more.
Life is to ask the question why,
Yes?
and especially the question why not flourish and help others flourish.
All right, life is to ask the question why, and especially why
Not flourish,
why not
help others flourish.
yeah, why not flourish and why not help others flourish? Sure. And there was, I heard two other people go at the same time, so you get in, you get grandfathered in. Who was it? Okay. I'm sure you had the same answer. Awesome. Yeah. So hold on to that as we think about what Paul is talking about today. I wonder if that's a modern day of saying the same kinds of things that Paul was trying to say. I think Paul wants to talk about a similar grasshopper moment, about what it means in life to be present, to reflect, and to question, about how the changes in life over time can matter, about what it means when we experience the beautiful and the ordinary, what happens when we question why, and when we question why not flourish, why not help others flourish. You just wrote the whole sermon in the same spirit as Paul's letter. So I think Paul has this perspective shifter that makes him wonder how there could ever be anything else but that worth doing. I think like Oliver, Paul has lived his way into a bigger-than-life answer to the question that Oliver ends with almost rhetorically. Tell me, what is it you actually plan to do with your one wild, precious life? Also, like Oliver, Paul can't help but end with the question. He can't help but ask the question outward, to invite others into it. He can't wait to live this wild and precious life together with his friends. So he writes in an effort to describe what has happened to him and to invite them to join in. In today's portion, we're heading down the home stretch, as I said earlier. It's the final 50%, and I think it's that place in Paul's letter is like that place whenever you're having an important conversation with someone, and maybe, you kind of first get through the fluff and the niceties, and then all of a sudden you have this moment where you realize, oh, now I see. This is why we're here. This is, I think, that moment in the letter. So first, to prepare for that moment, Paul brings up all the things that have given him access in the world. Well, that sounded really Texan, didn't it? Access. A-C-C-E-S-S. Access in the world. He wants his friends to see that he's had almost unlimited access to the kinds of things that reportedly matter most. These are the kinds of things that I think are at the center of most of our outer life preoccupations. So he literally lists off some of the material advantages that he says offer confidence in standing. Here they are, verse 4. If anyone else has reason to put their confidence in physical advantages, I have even more. Verse 5, I was circumcised on the 8th day, That's just evidence that he is a full member of God's covenant people. I am from the people of Israel, he says. That means he's an Israelite with all the privileges and rights that adhere. I am the tribe of Benjamin. There were one of two tribes considered to be strictly faithful to the covenant, and the tribe of Benjamin was the winning one. He's a member of a chosen tribe. I am a Hebrew of Hebrews. That was their way of saying that his lineage was pure. He wasn't borderline or mixed heritage. He had a mom and a dad that were both Hebrews. He's the real deal. So these are what we call birth privileges, right? Things we're born into. Paul was a pedigreed Jew. What privileges were you born into? Just think for a moment. And conversely, this will be an important question to put together later. What birth privileges were you denied? And then Paul moves to the next list. He talks about all the advantages that he has acquired, the stuff he's worked hard for, how he's been spending his life, what he's been doing. Verse 5, with respect to observing the law, I am a Pharisee. Verse 6, with respect to the devotion to the faith, I harassed the church. Verse 6b, with respect to the righteousness under the law, I'm blameless. So these are the kind of privileges that come with things like hard work and focus and dedication to a particular thing, or responsible living, or rule following. These are the kinds of things that come with a little bit of luck and a lot of who you know. So, what kind of privileges are yours because of your hard work, your responsible living, your rule following, or being in the right place at the right time? What kinds of privileges are yours because of what you've acquired or done with your life? And conversely, what kinds of privileges have you been denied even after you've worked hard, lived responsibly, or been in the right place at the right time? So Paul's just bringing all those things up into the room. Now, what are they going to have to do with what matters most? What are your things going to have to do with what matters most on both ends of the spectrum? Then Paul says, verse 7, these things were my assets, but I wrote them off as a loss for the sake of Christ. Verse 8, and even beyond that, I consider everything a loss in comparison with the superior value of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord. And then just a little bit beyond that in the letter, Paul adds, verse 12, oh, it's not that I've already reached this goal or have already perfected it, but I pursue it so that I may grab hold of it, because Christ grabbed hold of me for this purpose that I have discovered. Jesus grabbed hold of me so that I could live into what matters most. Now, what is it? I just told you everything it's not, he says. Can you hear it? As Paul writes, he's living his way into knowing the gift of his one wild and precious life. And the gift is to increasingly realize that life, all of it, whether it's watching grasshoppers or enduring suffering, all of life, Paul is realizing, can be a greenhouse where a love relationship with Christ grows. For Paul, knowing Christ and being formed toward love has become the real possibility that's inside every action, every endeavor, every interaction. And that shift that knowing Christ can be the real thing beneath every single thing, has totally shifted his investment portfolio. And so Paul says that everything seems like an asset. all the stuff we have because we got lucky, and all the stuff we have because we earned it. But then Paul says, don't invest there, or you're going to miss the one wild and precious life. Don't make that your primary investment. It's not the main thing. But here's what I think is an even more freeing thought. If you don't have big piles of that stuff that we're holding, conversely then, all the privileges that we missed by luck of the draw or because they passed us by, intentionally in some cases, all the deficits that we think are limiting us, don't invest there either. Don't camp out there either, or you'll miss the offer of the wild and precious life that is calling out to all people, which is how Paul can say in verse 8b, I've lost everything for him. But what I lost I think of as sewer trash, so that I might gain Christ and be found in him. That is what I call a difficult section. How we parse these verses matters. I mean, what real things, like in the real world that we're living in, what real things am I supposed to lose or even consider losing if I want to gain Christ? So does that mean I should stop pursuing my career goals and instead become a missionary? Is that what gaining Christ means? Should I quit giving most of what I've got to parenting our 3 children? Can I shed my race or my sexuality or my heritage, or should I? Does this mean throw everything to the wind and just sit in the grass with a Bible and a grasshopper and prepare to know Christ for the rest of my life? What does it mean? What's the practical application of these verses? What's the real impact to my resume or to my focus? What if I tried to practice this? How would I do it? Well, for Paul, being found in Christ meant that everything that remained in his life became a conduit for knowing God. Everything wasn't really about those things, or at least not finally. Finally, they were opportunities for Paul to know God. So there was some stuff in Paul's life, like torturing other people, for example, that had to stop because there was no life in it. So that stuff went into the lost category. We've all got stuff that needs to go into the lost category. But there was other stuff, like the fact that Paul was outspoken and a natural leader, for example. That stuff just shifted. God began to use Paul's old external preoccupations for inner life purposes. So Paul's influence and his personality and his reputation, for example, those were things that were no longer self-promoting for Paul, but they were made magnetic with meaning for Christ. So in many ways, he was who he always was. His focus was just shifted to something bigger. So, is it a loss or a gain in my case? Is it a loss or a gain in my case to be an American, a woman, to be heteronormative, to be a wife, a mother, to be affluent by every world standard, to be a pastor? Are these privileges or deficits? Yes, they are. And either way, they are all losses. Every resume is a loss until it becomes a conduit through which I discover and am discovered by Christ. And then I'm made worthy and beautiful, not because of who I am, but because of who God is and how God will find me in every moment. So what if knowing Christ is not always about doing something different instead of what I was doing just before? What if it isn't about losing who we already are, but instead is mostly about being who we already are and doing what we already do, with one difference? namely that all of it is for living into what matters most. I think that changes everything. I think it's the biggest perspective shifter. It's transformation that Paul's talking about. I think it even works with small identities. So, for example, this morning, I had a few smaller identities at play. As I was trying to get ready to come to church after the weekend that we've all had, I was late. I was frustrated with myself, and I just wanted to bolt. Have you ever had that moment where you just think, I don't want to be in a bad car accident, but a little tiny one, just enough to give me a good excuse, for the day would be okay. And then, again, because this was today's topic, I had this moment. How is this a conduit? How can this little micro-identity I've got going on right now be a conduit for knowing and being known by God? How might I discover God or be discovered by God, be helped, healed, made more whole because of this little thing I've got going on right here? What if the main thing is not about me being late or frustrated with myself? What is the main thing about how God can get to me because of this? So I started thinking about all the things God wants to give and how God doesn't need me to be the one to give all of them. And in about 5 or 6 minutes, I was able to call someone and admit what's true. And you know what that saved me from? It saved me from this shell of an identity I was going to show up here with this morning, this invincible, I can do it all, I've got it all handled. How is everything in life an opportunity to discover and be discovered by God? So I think Paul's answer to Oliver's question, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? I think Paul's answer is to spend our lives as contractors, as Hokie fans, as divorced fathers. I think Paul's answer is to spend our life at the grocery store and in our chemistry test and at an initiation ceremony and at a play date in the park and while we're out walking our dogs. I think Paul's answer is to spend all of life toward the goal of opening every moment to Christ. And I think Paul is saying that will reorient the way God helps us live toward big enough for a whole life answers to questions like, does my life have meaning and purpose? Yes. Who and what can I trust? I know. Whom and what shall I serve? Wow, this really can matter most today. How will I maintain hope? Amen.